And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. A happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I hope everyone has their turkeys in. I hope that everyone's going to be celebrating with friends and family. Do so safely, but don't buy into the the anti-Thanksgiving hype there, everyone. I hope everyone's going to have a good Thanksgiving, no matter how you do it. This is a special Thanksgiving episode of the podcast. I'm running this one solo. Josh and Joe are off, but I wanted to make sure that we kept up the momentum because we just hit number 13 on Apple Podcasts for political podcasts in the country, number 13. So I want to make sure that we keep publishing, that we keep putting out podcast episode because we're making serious moves. So everyone, thank you if you've already subscribed to the podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you check out the link in the description to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. It really does help us a lot as we try and grow and reach the top, right? It's pretty crazy that we're number 13 in the country now. So we had some news break last night. Big news usually comes in threes. So we had City Pal release the Kraken in Georgia and Michigan, but we also had a ruling out of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court found that it's almost like they knew we were going to do this episode because we teased this episode yesterday. The Supreme Court ruled that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, that his anti-religion, anti-synagogue, anti-church executive orders were unconstitutional. Now, if anyone doesn't know, in New York City, they basically had two sets of rules. They had one set of rules for houses of worship, and they had another set of rules for secular businesses. So if you were a house of worship, you could only have, if you were in a red zone, you could have 10 people inside. If you were in an orange zone, you could have 25 people inside. And that included, if you're in a Catholic church, that includes the altar boys, that includes the priest, that includes the Eucharistic ministers, right? That includes the choir. So you can see how if you're in a Catholic church, just the people involved in the mass right there, you get to 10. You can't have a Catholic mass the way you want to have it if you're only allowed to have 10 people in the room. And in the Orthodox Jewish community, it was especially egregious because depending on what sect of Judaism you adhere to, they have a concept known as a minyan. And a minyan means that if you want to perform certain elements of the faith, like if you want to have a bris, if you want to actually pray, if you want to have a prayer session, you have to have a minyan, which is a minimum of 10 males in the room. So one of the things that you need a minyan for in Judaism, you need a minyan to bury someone. So let's say you're a widow and your husband just died. You need to have 10 men there in order to bury your husband. So if you're a woman, that means that if you're only allowed to have 10 total people there, that means the woman isn't allowed to attend her own husband's funeral. Because if she went, it would be illegal because at most they'd only be able to have 9 Jewish men there to make up the minyan. So there's a lot of really ridiculous stuff with Andrew Cuomo's executive order. And thank goodness the Supreme Court smacked him down. Now, thank goodness Amy Coney Barrett was on the court because it ended up being a 5-4 decision. I'm really getting tired of the media saying that Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the liberals on the bench. No, Chief Justice John Roberts is a liberal on the bench, right? Gone are the days where he seems to be siding with conservatives. He tried to keep these egregious rules in place. The idea that if you run a hardware store, you could have more people in your building than a church could or a synagogue could. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. A pizza shop could have more people inside than a church could. But the best, I was reading it last night, one of the best parts of the whole decision, there were actually a bunch of competing decisions. There was the main decision, then there was concurring decisions, then there was a dissent, another dissent. I particularly liked Gorsuch, what he wrote, and I put it up on the screen. This was one of my favorite parts because he really does explain it very well. He says, quote, "At the same time, the governor has chosen to impose no capacity restrictions on certain businesses he considers, quote, essential. And it turns out that the businesses the governor considers essential include hardware stores, acupuncturists, and liquor stores. Bicycle repair shops, certain signage companies, accountants, lawyers, and insurance agents are all essential too. So at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it is always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, to shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your distal points and meridians. Who knew public health would so perfectly align with secular convenience?" I loved how he wrote that. highly recommend that you go and read the decision, and read the dissents, because the dissents are absolutely insane. Right? The idea that you can allow a supermarket to have 100 people inside, but it's constitutional to only allow the church to have 10, or the synagogue to have 10. I mean, this is crazy stuff. The liberals on the bench actually ruled that way. That yes, you can have a concert socially distanced with more than 10 people, but you can't have a church service. I mean, it's obviously unconstitutional, and it obviously sets up two different rules, one for secular organizations and one for religious organizations. So thank goodness we have a conservative majority on the court, and I'm hopeful that Donald Trump will ultimately be declared the winner. But if he doesn't, we need to get all of those conservative justices their vitamins for the next 4 years. They have to all go on a vitamin regimen. I think Trump will pull it out. But anyway, I wanted to talk about how we got to that ruling. That was what today was supposed to be about. I didn't know the Supreme Court was going to drop this on our plate late last night. I want to explain how we got to the ruling, how we got to a place where the Supreme Court actually had to step in and say, no, you have the right to go to church. No, you have the right to go to a synagogue. And we got there by a very strangely anti-Semitic stance from Andrew Cuomo and other Democrats, including Bill de Blasio. All year, they have been scapegoating Jewish communities. They have been blaming Jewish communities for the pandemic because Jewish communities want to keep practicing their faith. And if you know anyone who's an Orthodox Jew, listen, there's plenty of complaints people have for Orthodox Jewish communities. If you live in like the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, you know that some of the things they do can be a little ridiculous, right? The idea of every house is also categorized as a synagogue, so they don't have to pay property taxes, right? But then they send their kids to the schools anyway. There's a lot of shady stuff that goes on in a lot of these communities, but that doesn't mean that they have to give up their First Amendment right to freedom of religion because there's a respiratory virus that 99.9% of people survive. And that's what we are ultimately talking about. And that's what the Supreme Court had to step in and say, no, if there's a respiratory virus, that doesn't mean that your First Amendment right to freedom of religion disappears. It doesn't mean that the government can just swoop in and say, no, you're not allowed to go to church. And the really interesting, I mentioned this on the podcast before, earlier in the pandemic, during Ramadan, the city of New York actually handed out a ton of meals. I think it was either in the tens of thousands or in the hundreds of thousands of meals, free meals to people in celebration of Ramadan. Very, very strange. Anthony Fauci came out and he said that there's no guarantee that Easter and Passover next year will be safe enough to celebrate. We won't be back to normal. But he didn't mention Ramadan, which, as we mentioned on the show, happens 8 days after Easter next year. So it's strange that not only does it seem that the government in New York is trying to separate and distinguish between secular activities like Black Lives Matter protests and church services or synagogue services, but they also seem to be setting aside the different Abrahamic faiths and trying to carve out an exception for Muslims and stricter enforcement for Jews and Christians. It's very weird. But I mean, is anyone all that shocked that the people who would play and try and pick winners and losers would also apply the same concept to different Abrahamic faiths? And you understand why Democrats have a soft spot for the Muslim faith. They believe that the Muslim faith has been targeted while they themselves are targeting Christians and Jews. It's a very strange dynamic. But I want to explain how we got there, because we got there through the attempt to basically enforce rules against the Orthodox Jewish community in New York. And the Orthodox Jews just didn't want to take it. So here's earlier this year. This is from Mayor Bill de Blasio. My message to the Jewish community and all communities is this simple. The time for warnings has passed. I have instructed the NYPD to proceed immediately to summons or even arrest those who gather in large groups. This is about stopping this disease and saving lives, period. Now, you'll notice that was on April 28th, 2020. Noticeably absent was any of that kind of enforcement when the Black Lives Matter protests / riots were taking place a month later, right? He said to all communities, well, that was a lie, right? It was a lie. He didn't break up the other ones. He only broke up Jewish events. And so we see then, immediately after that order, he sends them out. Mayor Bill de Blasio oversaw the dispersal of a crowded Hasidic funeral, lashing out at mourners and warning of arrests over social distancing rules. Now, obviously, the concept I talked about of a minyan doesn't apply to that scenario, right? That's way more than 10 people. But it's important to note at that time, as I mentioned, if you are a widow and you lost your husband, under those rules, if you were in a red area, you had no right to attend the funeral because there would have to have been 10 men present to bury the husband. It's just insane. Obviously, that's more than 10. And it was a beloved rabbi in the community. The community wanted to come out and show their support for him. But no, that was banned. Noticeably absent from any of that. Let's see if we have it. Like, here we go. This is a leftist protest in New York. Notice how there's no police there at all.
Y'all see that drum?
Look at that.
Let's let the militarized
The crowd, the camera's panning. Look at that. I believe that was for Black Trans Lives Matter. Like, not even just Black Lives Matter. That's a percent of a percent of a percent, right? That's like the smallest percent you could possibly get to in terms of lives matter. But look, there's no police breaking that up. That's a street festival. You don't hear Andrew Cuomo or Bill de Blasio saying, "How dare you? You're killing people." You don't see it because there's one set of rules for the Jews in New York, and there's another set of rules for the political groups that Andrew Cuomo and the Democrats feel are on their side. Listen, okay, let's listen a little bit about Andrew Cuomo, what he had to say about the synagogues, because this is from earlier on in the pandemic, him literally targeting Jews for breaking the rules and basically insinuating that it's them who are causing the pandemic to spread. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
And that's that. Religious gatherings, the city's proposal does not close religious institutions. We know religious institutions have been a problem. We know mass gatherings are the super spreader events. We know there have been mass gatherings going on in concert with religious institutions in these communities for weeks. For weeks. I don't mean little violations. You're only supposed to have 50, they had 55. I'm talking about you're only supposed to have 50 outdoors. They had 1,000. These are pictures from the past couple of weeks. And these are just emblematic. You've all seen pictures like this for weeks. What did you think was going to happen? What did you think was going to happen? Religious institutions.
Notice how it says
are
especially
mass
religious.
gatherings and raise the greatest potential. It's schools and it's large mass gatherings. Schools, frankly, because they're students, and that's where our heart goes, our priority goes. But in terms of numbers, it's large gatherings, and large religious gatherings are large gatherings. These have been going on for weeks. You don't see masks, and you see clear violation of social distancing. When were these pictures from?
One on the right is more recent than one on the left.
Okay. But they're in the recent past. So this has been going on for weeks. We've been talking about it for weeks. If
All right, I'm going to cut it there.
we're going to keep religious
Basically, he's complaining about the Jews. It's all the Jews' problem. It's all the Jews' fault. This is a quick clip of, so Cuomo's been having these conference calls with the Jewish community and with other communities, trying to basically get them all to agree to enforce it among their people. And on all of these calls, he's been so anti-Semitic, and I don't say that lightly. Like, I'm not Jewish. I'm told that in my family, if you go back a few generations, there's a, like, my great grandmother or my great great grandmother was Jewish. So I'm not a card carrying member of the tribe, as it were. But I've always been very sympathetic to it because I know that if you trace back my lineage far enough, part of my family was Jewish at the time. So I'm very sympathetic to this, and I don't feel personally targeted, but I understand how people could listen to that and say they're coming for me, right? When you see that Andrew Cuomo is giving this presentation and it's supposed to be about mass gatherings, but he says especially religious, that's why the Supreme Court smacked them down. Because you can't say that mass gatherings, like you can't say that religious mass gatherings are more dangerous than regular mass gatherings. You just can't do it, right? It's unconstitutional. Again, thank goodness the Supreme Court smacked them down. But this is audio. I don't think Cuomo really wanted to get out there. He's on a conference call with other community members talking about how the Jews are a politically powerful community. Let's listen to this.
To do that, the one thing they had to do was the enforcement. Now, they don't want to do the enforcement. Why? Because it's politically sensitive. And let's be frank and candid at this point in history. The community we're talking about today is a politically powerful community. You know it, and I know it. So I understand that they don't want to incur the wrath and the political downside. It is their primary function. If I had to do it all over again, I would have taken over the enforcement on day one. Now, I can.
So that was Andrew Cuomo talking about how, if we're being honest, the Jews are a very powerful, politically connected community. Now, this isn't supposed to be a history day, and it's not going to be all about history today. But when you listen to this, you hear the same kind of anti-Semitic language that you would have expected to hear in Germany after World War I, in the interwar period in Germany. The idea that there's a problem, and you've identified the Jews as the problem. And you said that the reason we can't get them under control is they're very politically connected. Right? I mean, and that's the whole, that's the same deal. Right? It's like, oh, after World War I, Germany was bankrupt. I mean, the Allies after World War I made a huge mistake, and they tried to punish Germany. Even though it was basically a standstill, they forced Germany into submission, and they destroyed the economy. It was so bad in Germany that you actually had to, if you wanted to buy a loaf of bread at one point, it took a wheelbarrow full of cash. Think about that. That's how bad inflation was. You had to take a wheelbarrow full of a mound of cash and bring it to the bakery, and that was enough to buy bread. I mean, the paper money was so worthless that they would wallpaper their houses with it, use it to start fires. They would take bricks of cash and give it to their children as like blocks to play with. I mean, the Allied powers destroyed Germany, and they created the conditions that ultimately led to Adolf Hitler, right? But Adolf Hitler's message was Germany can be great again. And the reason we aren't great right now is obviously because the Allied powers and the Jews, right? The Jews are so politically connected. They have all the money. They're not hurting, right? It's the same kind of language. So when you see it, and I've studied genocide studies. That was actually my minor in college. It was faith, peace, and justice. It was interdisciplinary between theology and philosophy, looking at human rights issues. So I've studied it. I've studied how we get to genocide. And what we're seeing in New York isn't genocide. I want to make sure we understand that. It's not genocide. But it's everything you would expect to see if you were studying a genocide and trying to figure out how you got there, right? The idea of blaming Jews, blaming one group for the problems, right? Demonizing that group. We're going to see in a little bit how Andrew Cuomo's, how his rhetoric has actually compelled people to start taking action and harassing and attacking Jewish neighborhoods and Jewish people, right? What you see here in New York, targeting, blaming Jewish people for all the problems of society, it is textbook what you would expect to see in the ramp up towards a genocide. Now, I hope we don't get there, right? I hope we don't get there. But it's important to note the definition of genocide, if you actually look it up, doesn't mean you have to kill all of a certain group of people. The definition of genocide is the attempt to destroy in whole or in part a specific protected group, right? It lists like ethnic, religious, all those political, political will be politicized, but basically a protected group. You have to attempt to destroy them in whole or in part. You don't have to kill them all for it to technically be a genocide. You just have to try and destroy a group in part. So what we're seeing now is literally every genocide historian would be terrified, because we're seeing the same stuff happening in New York that we saw back in Nazi Germany, what we saw in Rwanda, right? Go down the list. It's the same type of vile anti-Semitism. So there was something that happened. This made me laugh, and I shouldn't laugh because we just talked about potentially being on the road to genocide, which I hope it doesn't happen, but it really only takes one guy with a baseball bat, right? Or one guy with a Molotov cocktail saying he's gonna take it into his own hands, right? Genocide doesn't usually start with a top down. You look at Rwanda. The Rwandan genocide was not the worst genocide ever, but it was the fastest that many people had ever been killed. And it wasn't top down. It was people taking it into their own hands and collectively doing it. So I want to play this because this is one of the events that they say are super spreader events. And in fairness, it probably is. But I was hearing that, there was a secret Hasidic wedding in New York, a secret Jewish wedding. I'm like, oh, wow, secret wedding? Wow, what'd they do? Meet under the bridge? And no, this is what the secret Orthodox wedding looked like. And it made me laugh because I didn't know what to expect. And all of a sudden, we'll just watch how they're dancing. It's a little funny. So here's the secret Orthodox wedding that happened over the weekend of thousands of people in attendance. I don't know why I found it so funny. Just when I turn on, I just see the whole crowd just bouncing up and down like this. I found it a little bit humorous. But listen, that's the wedding. That's how they want to practice their faith. This is a part of their faith. And to say that they can't do this, I mean, you can't just say you can't have one. Oh, here's Andrew Cuomo.
Weeks ago, there was a very secret Hasidic wedding where 7,000 to 10,000 people attended, completely maskless. And I'm just wondering your reaction to this. Will there be consequences? And what's to stop this from happening over the holidays?
If that happened, I heard the report. If that happened, it was a blatant disregard of the law. It's illegal. It was also disrespectful to the people of New York. The law protects everybody. It protects you, but it also protects me. We went through this with weddings. We literally stopped the wedding a couple of nights before, which was going to be a very large wedding. If it turns out that because we stopped that wedding, the reaction was, well, we'll have a secret wedding, that would be really shocking. And totally, I think, deceitful of the conversation. That's the problem with the secret 7,000. It's hard to keep a secret. You know, they say the only way to keep a secret? Tell no one. That's the only way to keep a secret. 7,000 people were there. It's going to be hard to keep that a secret.
All right, I'm going to cut it. So that's him saying, we're going to crack down on it. And they're fining the synagogue $15,000. They're fining the synagogue $15,000. I saw someone just typed in, this guy got an Emmy, and Mark responded, enema. Yeah, that guy got an Emmy for making us all calmer with his television performances. Well, no, it doesn't make you calmer if you happen to be an Orthodox Jew or if you happen to be a Catholic. I mean, just a brief aside, he wasn't just targeting Orthodox Jews. The Catholic Church has been suffering in New York. It's to the point where most Catholic schools, I believe it actually got to the level of most. If not, it's a ton of Catholic schools had to close down. Why? The Catholic schools are funded by Sunday masses. They pass the baskets, right? One basket will go to the church. They'll usually do a second offering. A lot of times that second offering will be to help fund the Catholic schools. So if there's no in-person church, there's no second basket, there's no funding for the schools don't have that funding. Then if they're not allowed to even be open, right, they're paying taxes, they're paying rent on buildings if they don't own the buildings, they probably do. The kids aren't allowed to go in, so they actually closed a bunch of schools. This is a big deal. I mean, it's not government-funded schools where they have a union where the union can demand to get paid even if they don't do the work. Catholic schools were really suffering. So it's not just Cuomo attacking the Jews. I don't want to say he is anti-Semitic, right? He absolutely does hate Jewish people, obviously. You can't put these policies into place and say the things he said and be a lover of the Jewish people, or even just like a friendly neighbor, right? You can't say these things and not be anti-Semitic. I want to play this. I don't know if we'll play the whole thing, but this was a Jewish school. They're also targeting Jewish schools. Now, again, this is where I have to really explain that the Hasidic community, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey and I would always drive through Lakewood. And Lakewood, New Jersey, anyone doesn't know, has a huge Hasidic, huge Orthodox community. Like you go through, I would always drive through on my way to Six Flags, Great Adventure. And you sit there and you see Hasidic Jews walking down the street, and it's fine. You hear, though, some of the things that they would do to game the system. And these communities are very good at using loopholes to game the system. They just are, right? So in the schools in New York, schools reclassified themselves as daycares, right? Or they reclassified themselves as like Bible studies. Not schools, these are daycares. Which, if you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, schools essentially are educational daycares. If you are a parent and you work and you rely on a school for childcare, schools closing puts you up the creek without a paddle. So they would reclassify them from schools to being daycares, which, yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's fair, but they're ultimately kind of operating the same as schools. But they use that to try and stay open and brand themselves as essential. So the governor and the city started cracking down on them, sending people to give summonses to fine the schools for being open. Here's the problem. They sent an enforcer, a police officer, to one of the schools to issue a summons, and the school was closed. So they were issuing a summons anyway. They said, you are in violation for being open, and they were issuing a summons even though it was closed, and they were demanding to walk through to see if it was really closed. We won't play the whole thing because it's kind of long, but just to get a feel, this is a city official fining an Orthodox Jewish school for being open when there's not a soul inside.
Yeah, I mean, it's confusing.
Doesn't sound confusing to me. It sounds that you're just looking to give summons because there's no one in this building. You were here last week, there was no one here, yet you're just writing up a summons outside. Do you want to go take a look?
Elodie, I'm gonna go take,
Why don't you come join us? You want to go upstairs? You want to go this floor? Where do you want to go?
let's start with upstairs
Let's
first.
start upstairs.
Yeah,
but
we check everywhere.
yet you're still writing your summons outside. You have empty classrooms. Let's go upstairs. You gonna join us? Come.
So they walk through.
Which way do you want to go? Well, you're the one.
There's no one there. We're going to cut it. The gist of this is that they are issuing a summons to the school for being open illegally, but there's no one in the school. So they're issuing the summons based on something they'd heard previously. Someone, like all these tipster lines, tried to turn them in and say, oh, they're operating illegally. They're open when they should be closed. But by the time they get there, actually see it in person, they've closed up. Now, did they do that because they knew it was coming? Or did they happen to do this just because it was right before Thanksgiving and said, okay, you have off? I don't know. But the fact is that they were going to issue a summons and put it right on the outside of the door without even proving whether or not it was open or not. They were going to fine them for doing something they couldn't literally prove. They couldn't actually prove it. That's like a cop pulling you over and saying, I heard you were speeding yesterday. Here's your ticket. That's not how it works. It's hearsay. It's not how it works. Exactly, Brian. It's hearsay. You can't issue someone a fine if you didn't actually see them or have reasonable suspicion or have any of those other levels of suspicion to think that they actually did something wrong. And this isn't even illegal. It's just an executive order. Probably this is harassment. They have a list of Jewish schools and they're going around, they're fining all of them. Unbelievable. So there's a community in New York. I want to make sure I get it right. So there's a community in New York. It's called Palm Tree, New York. Palm Tree, New York. And they have had a really hard time with COVID-19. At one point, it was as high as, I believe, 34%. Yeah. So they had 34% positive rate in this area. Curious Joel. Yeah, it's like Orange County, New York, right around. There's a lot of Orthodox Jewish people who live in Orange County, New York. So they had a problem. They had, at one point, 34 of everyone who was being tested in this area, and it's not predominantly, but there's a large Orthodox community in this area. 34% of everyone getting tested for COVID was positive. Just to put this in perspective, Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio will close down an area if you surpass 3%, right? If you surpass 3%, they say it's too dangerous for anything to be open. You'll have to shut down. And this area was testing at 34%. Now, whether or not you agree with it, whether you think those tests are accurate, that's a different thing. All I'm saying is, if you want to see how freaked out the Democrats in charge of New York were, they were 11 times higher than the cutoff to trigger a shutdown, to trigger a lockdown. So what did the Jewish community in Orange County do? This is what I mean. They're very good at identifying loopholes. Orthodox Jews are very good at reading the law. They have a lot of lawyers in their families. And that's not anti-Semitic. That's very true. When you have a community like this, you have a number of lawyers, you have a number of doctors. So they read the law and they understand, okay, so the reason you're closing us down is because we're over 3%. So what did they do? Well, they're accused of telling people who are sick not to get tested. That's an accusation. I don't know whether that's true. They say, okay, one of the ways we're going to stop the tests from putting us above a threshold that will force them to close us down. And again, until last night when the Supreme Court ordered, if you were over 3%, that was the trigger that you could no longer have synagogue services of over 10 people. So they said, okay, we got to figure out a way to do this. So what did they do? They're accused of not letting sick people get tested, sending sick people to the hospital who have COVID, but refusing the tests. That's one thing they're accused of. The other thing, though, that they actually did is they started flooding the system with healthy people. So if you're 34%, that's okay. You have to reduce that by a factor of 11 before you can even think about having synagogue services again. They start sending healthy people in to get tested. Now, is that a loophole? Is that bad faith? I don't think so, because the state of New York was actually encouraging healthy people to get tested. Because they had so many tests, they wanted to get a feel for where the virus was. They wanted to get an accurate count of asymptomatic carriers. So they were saying, listen, get tested. If you think you might have it, get tested. So the Orthodox Jewish community in Orange County, New York, said, okay, we're going to get tested. They sent all of their healthy people to get tested. So they're accused of not letting the doctors or the hospital staff test sick people. That might be true. But what I absolutely know is true is that they flooded the system with healthy tests, with negative tests they knew would be negative. So what happened was it went from 34% positive all the way down to 2%. And miraculously, once they got below 3, they're allowed to have synagogue services again. So people in the area are furious that, oh, you gamed the system. Well, no, the system is BS from the start, right? 34%. That means if you have 3 people get tested and one of them is positive, right? That means you're at 34%. No one can go to synagogue. Right? But if all of a sudden you take that 1 out of 3 and you flood it with like an additional 94, 93, that's how you get to 2%, right? You flood it with people with negative results. And all of a sudden that 1 out of 3 becomes 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100. And then you get down to 2%. And all of a sudden, wow, miraculously you can go to synagogue again. You know, I love the story because yeah, it's a little bit gaming the system, but it's ingenious. And if you truly believe, as they do, that they are being targeted, and which is true, they are being targeted. If they were targeting me, I would use every legal avenue at my disposal to stop the targeting. And that's what they did in Orange County, New York. So in New York City, though, there have been a lot of protests. There were Trump rallies in New York City with the Hasidic Jews, with the Orthodox Jews. There were a lot of protests. this is what happened when the Orthodox Jews decided to try and to basically burn their masks. They wanted to burn the masks, and they hated Cuomo for it. They wanted nothing to do with Cuomo, so they started burning their masks. Let's go ahead and watch. This is actually pretty incredible. So here you have, let me turn the volume down. There's not really any talking. So here you have, they're burning all their masks in the street, and the police show up. Now, right there, that is a more significant police presence for a bunch of Orthodox Jews burning their masks. That is a higher police presence than was ever sent to the Black Lives Matter. And I know that our feed is going up and down on Facebook. I don't know why. I think it's because we have Jew in the title. That might have been triggered. They're trying to take us down. This is a good time to remind everyone, if you're watching on Facebook, and this will be posted to YouTube afterwards, make sure you hit that share button. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. Make sure you comment. I think we might be getting taken down algorithmically because the title of today's episode is quite literally, does Andrew Cuomo hate the Jews? ? Parentheses, yes. We might be getting caught up in that. But yeah, no, that was Orthodox Jews in their neighborhood burning their masks. And you saw right there that had a more significant police response than many of the riots did in New York. All because the Jews decided to burn their masks. So what happens as a result of this? This is why anyone who studied genocide is very concerned about this. When you single out one group of people and say they are the reason that everyone else's lives are ruined, right? If you want to know, you own a grocery a bodega. You want to know why your life is harder now, or you run a pizza shop, a restaurant, you're not allowed to see customers. You want to know why? It's because the Orthodox community isn't wearing a mask. That's what's basically Andrew Cuomo has been presenting to them. Been saying, well, listen, the reason we have to lock this thing down is because the Jews aren't listening. So if you share that message enough and you convince people that their lives they're hurting because the Jews are doing something wrong, what do you think happens? You see a rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes. Now, I don't personally like branding things as hate crimes. I think a crime is a crime. But as it's defined, a hate crime, a crime against a Jew because they are a Jew, that's a hate crime. And we were seeing, at least in the middle of this year, we saw a rise of in 28%. A rise of anti-Semitic hate crimes by 28% in New York City alone since Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio started singling out the Jewish community for all of the city's problems. Listen, they shut down the economy, and instead of owning it, right? Instead of owning it, they're trying to blame the Jews for it. It is this classic Hitlerian response. And I don't like comparing someone to Hitler, right? That's like a logical fallacy. Reductio ad Hitlerium, reducing anything to Hitler. As soon as you do that, you tend to lose the argument. But in this case, it literally is a Hitler tactic. You're hurting. Oh, it's the Jews. They're the ones who did this to you. So what do you think happens when that's the narrative that gets pushed over and over and over again? You see anti-Semitic attacks and harassment of Jews. So this is a video from New York City of a leftist on a bike blaming the Jews and how they will not wear masks. And he's doing it with a megaphone. Let's watch this.
Disgusting. We're catching record high COVID cases here. Record highs every day. I know you feel like you're invincible, but other people aren't. So you have to wear a mask. There's no more of this non-civility bullshit with Trump. Biden's here. You don't get 4 more years. Civility only works if both sides do it. If one side does it, you got guys like you not wearing masks during a global pandemic where people are dying. Now, the virus doesn't care what God you believe in. Remember that.
Keep going.
So that's what's going on in New York. And that's what you see. Again, when you study genocide, when you study ethnic cleansing, I'm not saying we're going there, but when you study it, there's a point at which, if it ends up being top down, if it ends up being run by, if you get to a genocide, you get to an ethnic cleansing because of government actions, right? It gets to a point where it escalates because citizens, like-minded citizens, start taking the law into their own hands, right? Citizens start saying, you know what, they're right. the Jews are the ones causing all my problems. And you start seeing these good Samaritans, as they would think they would be, taking the law into their own hands, going into Jewish communities with a megaphone and basically condemning them, saying, how dare you not wear a mask? We're going to see a couple more videos of this, one of which does have some curse words, but instead of censoring it, I want you to hear what he says because it's disgusting. So that was a guy there. This is another one where a Hasidic or Orthodox Jew was walking through his own neighborhood and he gets accosted by a woman because he wasn't wearing his mask. But as he accurately points out, well, she's not wearing a mask. The contractor she has working on her driveway wasn't wearing a mask, and the other guy there wasn't wearing a mask either. She only wanted to criticize him. So let's go ahead and watch this. And there's a point where she says, this isn't your neighborhood, even though it is. Right? That's what we're talking about. Presenting the Jewish people as the other. Even if he lives there, it doesn't matter. It's not your neighborhood. Let's watch.
Where's your mask?
Right there.
Oh, mine is right there. Where's his mask? Where's his mask?
He just had it on his back before. He was doing something else.
So only I have to wear a mask?
No, everyone has to do it.
So where's your mask?
I told you, right?
You're not wearing it, so why would I wear it?
Right here in my house.
You're not wearing it, why would I wear it?
Because you're in my neighborhood. We don't go to your neighborhood and we do this.
This is my neighborhood.
This is not your neighborhood.
My mask is right here. When I need it, I wear it.
Okay,
See? He doesn't have a mask. He doesn't have a mask. And that person doesn't have a mask. And you don't have a mask. And you have the audacity to tell me to wear a mask. Shame on you.
Yes.
So you don't need to wear a mask when you're walking alone. You have to wear it because that is considered social distancing. If you're outside exercising, walking, no one else is around, you don't need a mask, even under their stupid rules. Right? And he has a mask. He puts it on. He says he puts it on when he needs to. But she's not wearing her mask. Right? She's not wearing her mask. Her workers aren't wearing their masks. And honestly, if you're working with concrete or cement like that, you would want to wear a mask. If you're working with dry cement, you would want to wear a mask. But he's not, right? He's not. Like, that would be the time to wear a respirator so that you don't get that into your lungs. But he's not even wearing a mask. So she thinks that she's better. She thinks that she's better than him, that she doesn't have to wear a mask, but he does. And again, as you heard at the end, even though he lives there, it's not his neighborhood. Again, that's textbook. It really is textbook. Here's another example of a Jewish man harassed by a woman on the street.
Are you getting into my face? You're not 6 feet away. You're not 6 feet away. Excuse me, you're not 6 feet. Are you gonna hit me? Are you gonna hit me? Are you gonna hit me now? You're not 6 feet away. Get out of here. You're not 6 feet away.
Like,
you're not 6 feet away.
Stay out and knock that shit out your fucking hand.
What are you doing?
Dumb, bro?
Where's your mask?
Where's my mask? On my face and went down because I'm trying to grab the shit from your hand.
It's not covered. Get out.
Unbelievable. That's the other part of this. They truly have, the left has this like superiority complex. She isn't even wearing her mask correctly. She's wearing it as a chin diaper. And she's chasing this guy around as he's saying, you're not 6 feet away. He's trying to run away from her. She isn't wearing a mask. She's spitting all over him, right? But she thinks that she's superior. Why? Because she's been taught that the Jews are the reason that they have a lockdown. It's not the fact that leftists in power abuse their authority to create winners and losers. No, she's been told that it's the Jewish community that's doing it. So when she's out and about and she sees any violation, yeah, she goes after them. This is the one I was talking about. This is pretty vile. Pretty vile. A Jewish man is walking down the side of the road and someone drives up next to him and curses at them. Drops an F-bomb. So viewer, listener discretion advised. It's pretty mean. So let's go ahead and play it.
Put your fucking mask on! Put your mask on! There's COVID cases! Hurry up! Put it on! Put it on!
He's just minding his own business. He's minding his own business. He's just walking down the road. It looks like he's on a phone. And this guy just runs up, curses at him, tells him to put on his mask. He doesn't need a mask. He's not near anyone. He's the only person walking on the road. Leave the guy alone. But no, this guy said, oh, wow, look. And you can tell that someone is an Orthodox Jew. You can tell by the hat. You can tell by the dress. You can tell by I don't know what they're called, the curly sideburns. I don't want to make fun of them, but you can tell. You can tell when someone is an Orthodox Jew in New York by how they present themselves, how they dress, how they groom themselves. So he sees this guy and he says, okay, this is going to be my moment to become viral. And he videotapes it before he drives up to him. And then he yells at him. But he didn't have to wear a mask even under their rules. Right? So this is what I mean when you create this whole concept, this whole notion that the pandemic is being caused or perpetuated by the Jews, or that the lockdown is being required because Jews won't obey. It's not surprising that you get people start to take it into their own hands, take enforcement into their own hands. And that's what you're seeing here. Now, what's the difference between taking enforcement, like yelling at someone, and anyone who has studied World War II history or pre-war history, how do you get from there to Kristallnacht? It isn't that far. The time it takes to get from harassing people in the street because they're Jewish and ransacking Jewish-owned businesses like they had in Kristallnacht in Germany, it isn't that big of a jump. Which is why, again, anyone who has studied genocide history, studied World War II, the Holocaust, what you see now should be very, very concerning. And this last bit is what should concern everyone. I'll say again, make sure you hit that share button. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. Make sure you like. And if you're watching on YouTube after we publish this, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. This is crazy. So we know that now they are limiting how many people can gather in their home, right? They're saying 6. 6 is the maximum. You can't have more than 6 people in your house for Thanksgiving. Now, a couple weeks ago, that number was 10. You couldn't have more than 10 people in your home. So this was an incident that happened in New York where an officer was outside. I believe he says he was there for a parking violation or some kind of traffic violation. He's outside and he peeks in a window and he sees what he considers to be more than 10 people inside of an Orthodox Jewish house. So he's not there to break up their gathering. It's not a party. It's not raucous. It's just a bunch of adults sitting down and enjoying each other's company. He sees it from outside. He looks in their window, and then he tries to force his way into their home. He tries to force his way into their home. And of course, they want nothing to do with that. So let's go ahead and watch this.
You have a noise complaint.
Can you stop after breathing in my face? I'm the one wearing a mask.
You have a glove. You have a glove. You have a face mask. Why do you care?
I'm talking to the owner here. But we had a complaint about vehicle parking in the front. Then I look up and you have over 10 people in a crowd.
So what?
Now it's an issue, okay?
What is the issue? Exactly.
The issue is...
This is not a party, there's no music, this is simply a simple thing. They have a few friends together. What is the issue that you need supposed to come into my house and tell me that it's okay for a police officer to walk into my house and say it's okay? When you are the police officer, you know the laws, you know the rules, you can't walk into my house and tell me that it's okay. You would have been a normal person, you would have walked out and said, okay, can I talk to you? Fine, I can listen to you. Instead, you're just backing that up again and again.
We're past that. We're past that point. You had a guest try to slam the door. Yeah, he tried to slam it on me. I'm trying to talk to you as a person. No, we didn't talk. The door was open.
You were standing here when I came down. I didn't see anything.
I told you, can ask come into the house. I just told you, can ask come into the house. You know it's your guest here. As he was walking out, he saw us, ran back inside and tried to...
So there is a famous poem written by Martin Niemöller. Probably mispronounced his name. It's a famous poem. It usually is called First They Came. And it goes like this. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So what we just watched was a police officer, not in New York City, outside the city, but New York State, empowered by these state rules and regulations and crackdowns. A police officer forcing his way into a home because from the street, he saw what he believed to be too many Orthodox Jews in one house. And you can tell that he forced his way into the home because as you watch it, He has crossed the threshold. He has entered their home. He is holding the door open and he is standing in their home. That is a violation of their Fourth Amendment right. He has no justification to force his way into their home because he believes that there's too many adults under the roof. This isn't a housing regulation violation. It's not like it's too many occupants. It's not an occupancy problem. He is enforcing a regulation that says, and it was enforced specifically in Jewish communities, right? That's where they went for enforcement. It applies to everyone, but the only enforcement really happened in Jewish communities, saying that you couldn't have 10 people under the same roof. So he's forced their way into their home. He's crossed their threshold. He's holding the door open. He will not let them close the door. And he says, too late to talk your way out of it. It's too late to handle this. Too late to handle this. Well, wait, no, it's not. It's not a crime. For all he knows, right, they're all brothers. For all he knows, they're all related to each other. This is possible. Entirely possible. For all they know, this is a legal gathering. Maybe everyone lives there. Maybe they all have bunk beds. I don't know. But the idea that he can just force his way into their house and he can hold the door open and cross their threshold and start yelling at them, that should make everyone nervous. Because you don't have to be Jewish to see what is happening. This isn't just talk anymore. This isn't just Andrew Cuomo sitting with a microphone and saying Jewish synagogues are the reason that we're having another outbreak. And remember, that's the same New York State government and the same New York City government that refused to allow contact tracers, people who go and try and figure out how people got sick, refused to allow contact tracers to ask anyone if they had been to a Black Lives Matter protest. Right? So they deliberately set policy in place to make it so that the Black Lives Matter protests could not be blamed for any COVID outbreaks, any COVID spread. They're the same ones that went after the Jewish community. They have no problem with a massive crowd fighting for black trans lives. But if you have a Jewish Orthodox wedding, you get fined $15,000. They didn't fine the organizers of that Black Trans Lives Matter rally $15,000. No, they helped set it up. They gave them a permit. But if you were a Hasidic Jew wanting to get married, no. If you are just 10 Jewish people under the same roof and a cop looks in your window and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, busting you. You open your door, he forces his way in. Listen, you're right, Shannon. It's not about COVID. This never was about COVID. This is about the government taking control of our lives, trying to shave away certain rights and liberties. The fact that my family isn't going to see my sister for Thanksgiving because they would have to drive through New York City. New York City says that they are putting up checkpoints, and they are detaining people that they suspect to be going to a Thanksgiving gathering. I mean, that's insane. But that's the reality in New York City. They're actually targeting, well, in that case, they're targeting Thanksgiving. They'll do the same for Christmas. They'll do the same for Passover, Easter. I guarantee they won't do it for Ramadan. But that's what we've gotten to. This isn't really about COVID anymore. This is about people who have gotten that taste for power and refuse to let it go. And this is someone, you look at Andrew Cuomo, he wrote a book about how great of a job he did during the pandemic before the pandemic was even over. Right? So you look at him and he knows he will never accept blame. Right? He even says that it's a conspiracy theory to say it was his office that ordered nursing homes to accept COVID positive patients, even though the memo has his name on it. Right? He says it's a conspiracy theory. And no, it wasn't me. That's a right-wing conspiracy theory. We know he will not accept blame because he's already written a book talking about how good of a job he's done. So he has to blame someone other than him, other than his administration. And what happens? He blames the Jews. Now listen, you go through history, the Jews are the punching bag in history. Every single empire, you go down the list, at one point or another, they tried to blame the Jews for the problems they were facing at the time. It's historical, right? History doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And what we're seeing in New York is just that. We are seeing history rhyming. No, we wouldn't have to have these lockdowns. We wouldn't have to have all of this if only the Jews behaved. If only the Jews wore their masks. I mean, wake up, people. They're going to say the same. If Thanksgiving, if they see an uptick in COVID cases. Even if they can't trace them to Thanksgiving, they'll say, listen, Thanksgiving caused an uptick. We cannot allow Christmas. We cannot allow Christmas. So they will use this to prohibit you from celebrating the birth of Christ. Right now, I'm in the San Antonio area. San Antonio just issued an edict starting tonight at 10 p.m., going all the way to Monday morning. There are no outside gatherings allowed. Right? If I go outside in my backyard, if me and my wife and my kid after 10 p.m., well, my kid should be asleep by then, but he isn't because he's a night owl. But if we were to go outside, the three of us, into our own backyard, that would be a violation of the San Antonio Bexar County shelter-in-place curfew. And I would get fined $1,000. This is crazy, people. They're trying to set this up to set the stage for Christmas to be canceled. That's what they want to do. They want to cancel Christmas. And just like that poem said, I'll read it again. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. We have seen what is happening. Whether or not you agree with what's happening or not, they are going through the list. And if we do not fight back against what we're seeing in New York, the anti-Semitism, thank goodness the Supreme Court jumped in. But if we don't fight back against the anti-Semitism, if we don't fight back against trying to vilify people who celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? This is only going to get worse. We are at this point because we let them get this far, right? We let them chip away to the point where they actually believe they have the power to fine you $1,000 for having a cocktail on your back porch after 10 p.m. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So this is our happy Thanksgiving. This is our Thanksgiving show. I wanted to do this because I've wanted to talk about this for a while, and we kept having to push this off because there's so much going on with the election. I thought this was a good opportunity to actually try and break this down, because what we're seeing from like a actual philosophical and theological and genocide studies perspective, what we're seeing is textbook. We're seeing textbook vilifying someone who's being described as the other, right? And we heard that as the guy's walking down the street. This is my neighborhood. And she says, it's not your neighborhood. Jews being branded as the other, Jews being blamed for the problems. Not all that surprising that citizens start taking to their own hands. And it isn't that big of a jump for the harassment, the shouting that we just saw to turn to violence. So I pray that please share this video. Please give us a thumbs up. Please like it on YouTube. Please give us a thumbs up. Please hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell for notifications. And yes, share this video. And if you want to make sure you subscribe to the audio version of the podcast. As I mentioned at the start, we're number 13 in the country now on Apple Podcasts for political podcasts. I want to get into single digits. I think we can this week because we're going to keep doing podcast episodes through the weekend. I think a lot of other shows are going to take off for the weekend. So make sure that you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, link in the description, and help us reach single digits. So yeah, that's going to be it for this Thanksgiving. I originally was going to talk about how the Pilgrims were socialists, but you know what? I wanted to call Cuomo out for what he is, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect with the Supreme Court ruling shutting down his ban on worship at churches and synagogues. So that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. If you like the show, please make sure that you like and follow our Facebook page. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. We also, as I mentioned, have the audio version of the podcast. Really important. Even if you watch us live, please go ahead and subscribe to the audio version as well. If you have an iPhone, an iPad, or a MacBook, it's very easy. Click the link in the description for Apple Podcasts. That will then auto download it every time it comes out. And if you can't watch us live, that's fine. You can listen to us as you go about your day. But if you don't have a Mac product, you can also download our podcast on Google Play Store, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or Podbean. We also have a system, a text system. We didn't run it today. I forgot to. But if you text FREEDOM to 89517, most of the time during weekdays when it's not just me on my own, you'll get a text alert when we go live because Facebook and YouTube don't always send you the alerts. So again, text FREEDOM to 89517 and you will get a text alert almost every day, just not today. There's also a link for you to join our email newsletter for action alerts. Please do that as well. We are on Parler at Conservative Daily. If you follow us, I will be happy to follow you back. And yeah, also Conservative Daily Store, link in the description. You want to help support the channel, want to rep some of our merch. We have a great t-shirt up there right now. Come and Take It Christmas, modeled after the Texas battle flag. Texas revolutionaries going up against the Mexican army. Mexican army demanded that they turn over all their cannons. And the Texans said, if you want them, come and take them. They immediately realized that they had a hot merch on their hands and they created the battle flag. Well, instead of the cannon, we have Come and Take It with a Christmas tree. So check out the link in the description for merch, help support the channel, and show the whole world that you're not going to buy in to their, to the ridiculousness of the lockdowns, of the anti-Christmas, of everything. So again, that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Remember that the fight clearly isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all stand up and fight together.